June 6, 1944. Just after midnight, the English Channel disappeared beneath thousands of ships. Battleships, destroyers, landing craft, and transport vessels stretched so far across the water that sailors later described it as an entire floating city moving toward Europe. The men aboard those ships knew exactly where they were headed. France. 4 years, Adolf Hitler's forces had occupied Western Europe, building massive concrete fortifications along the coastline. Machine gun nests overlooked every beach. Giant artillery guns pointed toward the sea. Miles of barbed wire, anti-tank obstacles, hidden mines, and reinforced bunkers transformed the Atlantic coast into what Nazi propaganda proudly called the Atlantic Wall. Many believed it was impossible to breach. But on this morning, the Allies intended to do exactly that. The operation had been planned for months in complete secrecy. More than 156,000 American, British, Canadian, and Allied troops would storm 5 beaches along the coast of Normandy. Around 11,000 aircraft would dominate the skies overhead. Nearly 7,000 naval vessels would support the invasion from the sea. It would become the largest amphibious assault in military history. History would remember it simply as D-Day. Yet among the thousands of stories that unfolded that morning, one has remained surprisingly unknown. A single American gunner, a man armed with nothing more than determination, discipline, and a machine gun, would fire nearly 12,000 rounds in one day. Not because he wanted glory, not because anyone ordered him to, but because stopping meant surrendering the beach, and possibly the invasion itself. His relentless fire kept German soldiers pinned down, protected advancing infantry, and helped create the precious minutes that thousands of Americans desperately needed to survive. This is his story. But to understand what happened that day, we first have to understand the impossible challenge facing every soldier aboard those landing craft. Hours before sunrise, the sea was rough. Cold waves slammed against steel hulls as landing craft bounced violently through the darkness. Many soldiers became seasick before they even reached shore. Inside each landing craft, silence competed with fear. Some men checked their rifles repeatedly. Others stared into nothing. Some quietly prayed. Letters written later described those moments as the longest minutes of their lives. Every soldier knew the statistics. Military planners expected enormous casualties. Many privately doubted they would survive the first hour. Despite months of preparation, no training exercise could truly prepare anyone for what waited on the beaches of Normandy. Across the channel, German defenders watched from concrete bunkers built high above the shoreline. These positions weren't temporary sandbag defenses. They were reinforced structures made from thick concrete designed to survive naval bombardment. Heavy machine guns pointed directly toward the landing zones. Mortars were already loaded. Artillery crews waited beside massive coastal guns. Every approach to the beach had been carefully measured. The Germans knew exactly where to aim before the first Allied soldier even stepped onto the sand. Field Marshal Erwin Rommel had spent months strengthening these defenses. Having studied previous amphibious assaults, he believed the invasion had to be defeated immediately. If Allied troops managed to establish a foothold inland, Germany's chances of stopping them would shrink dramatically. So Rommel ordered millions of mines buried beneath roads, fields, and beaches. Wooden stakes topped with explosives filled the tidal zone. Steel obstacles were positioned to rip open landing craft during high tide. Everything about the coastline was designed to turn the beaches into killing fields. Meanwhile, thousands of Allied paratroopers had already landed inland during the night. Many became scattered across the Norman countryside after intense anti-aircraft fire disrupted their aircraft formations. Small groups of American paratroopers fought isolated battles in darkness, capturing bridges, crossroads, and villages far behind enemy lines. Their mission was simple: delay German reinforcements long enough for the invasion beaches to survive. Back on the water, dawn slowly approached. Clouds drifted across the sky. Rain threatened. The wind remained unpredictable. Weather had already delayed the invasion once. General Dwight D. Eisenhower had faced one of the most difficult decisions of the entire war. Meteorologists predicted only a brief break in the storms. If he waited longer, another opportunity might not come for weeks. Thousands of ships were already loaded. Hundreds of thousands of men stood ready. Turning back wasn't simply inconvenient. It could have destroyed months of planning while alerting Germany that an invasion was imminent. Finally, Eisenhower made the decision history would remember forever. Okay, we'll go. Those 3 words sent the greatest invasion force ever assembled toward France. As the fleet crossed the channel, naval guns prepared for one of the largest bombardments in history. Battleships opened fire. Massive shells weighing hundreds of pounds screamed overhead before crashing into German defensive positions. Entire sections of coastline disappeared beneath explosions. Smoke climbed into the morning sky. Aircraft followed moments later. Bombers released thousands of tons of explosives against bunkers, artillery batteries, road junctions, and communication centers. From the sea, it looked devastating. Many Allied soldiers believed little could possibly survive such overwhelming firepower. But appearances were deceiving. Heavy smoke concealed the real damage. Many bombs landed inland instead of directly on German positions. Several reinforced bunkers remained almost untouched. Deep underground shelters protected many defenders from the worst of the bombardment. When the smoke eventually cleared, the machine guns were still there. As the first landing craft approached the beaches, naval officers could already see flashes coming from the cliffs. German artillery had survived. The invasion had entered its most dangerous phase. Inside one American landing craft sat a young gunner gripping the handles of his machine gun. He wasn't thinking about medals. He wasn't imagining history books. He wasn't even thinking about victory. He was thinking about the next few minutes, because once that steel ramp dropped, everything would change. The roar of engines mixed with exploding shells. Bullets skipped across the water. Landing craft exploded before reaching shore. Men disappeared beneath waves carrying nearly 80 pounds of equipment. Others never even had the chance to fire a single shot. And somewhere amid this unimaginable chaos, one machine gun would refuse to fall silent. One determined American would begin firing. Again, and again, and again. Before the day ended, he would send nearly 12,000 rounds toward the enemy, becoming one of the most extraordinary yet overlooked defenders of D-Day. But first, he had to survive the opening minutes of the invasion. Chapter 2, The Man Behind the Machine Gun. The landing craft rocked violently as waves crashed against its steel hull. Inside, every man could hear the unmistakable sound of bullets striking metal somewhere ahead. The closer they came to the beach, the louder the war became. Naval guns thundered behind them. German artillery exploded in front of them. The air itself seemed to vibrate with violence. Among the soldiers sat a young American machine gunner. Unlike Hollywood heroes, he wasn't fearless. His heart raced just like everyone else's. He had no way of knowing if he would survive the next 5 minutes. His job, however, left no room for hesitation. He belonged to a heavy weapons team, trained to operate one of the most powerful infantry weapons in the U.S. Army, the Browning M1919.30 caliber machine gun. It wasn't glamorous. It wasn't lightweight. And it certainly wasn't easy to carry through surf under enemy fire. The weapon alone weighed over 30 pounds. Add the tripod. Add ammunition belts. Add spare barrels. Add personal gear. Suddenly one soldier was carrying more than 70 pounds while trying to fight through cold water and soft sand. Unlike a rifleman, a machine gunner couldn't simply run wherever he pleased. His weapon needed a stable position. It needed ammunition. It needed teammates feeding belts into the receiver while he maintained continuous fire. Without the assistant gunner, even the best machine gunner in the world became far less effective. Every member of the crew depended on the others. Training for this role had taken months. Machine gunners practiced firing controlled bursts instead of emptying ammunition recklessly. They learned how to clear jams within seconds. They memorized barrel changes. They drilled target transitions repeatedly until every movement became instinct. Because in combat, seconds mattered. A single malfunction at the wrong moment could cost dozens of lives. The American invasion force had spent months preparing in England. Live-fire exercises, beach landings, obstacle courses, night operations, coordination with engineers, coordination with tanks, coordination with naval support. Everything was rehearsed over and over. Still, nothing truly resembled what waited in Normandy. As dawn broke over the English Channel, the first outlines of France emerged through mist and smoke. Some soldiers stared quietly toward shore. Others tightened the straps on their helmets. Several reached into their pockets, touching family photographs one last time. Many had written farewell letters the night before. Some letters would never be mailed. The machine gunner looked toward the beach. From a distance, it seemed almost peaceful. Then another artillery shell exploded. A landing craft to the left disappeared beneath a towering column of water. Men were thrown into the sea. Another explosion followed almost immediately. The illusion vanished. This was no ordinary battlefield. It was organized chaos. The closer the invasion fleet approached, the more intense German fire became. Machine guns swept the water. Mortars searched for clusters of landing craft. Artillery targeted larger vessels offshore. German defenders had spent years preparing firing tables for every likely landing zone. Many gunners didn't even need to see their targets. They already knew the distances. The Allied naval bombardment had damaged some positions, but many bunkers remained operational. Concrete walls several feet thick absorbed incredible punishment. When the shelling stopped, German crews climbed back into firing positions. Waiting, watching, ready. Inside the landing craft, the machine gun crew made final preparations. The assistant gunner checked ammunition belts once more. Every belt represented another chance to keep American soldiers alive. The gunner inspected the weapon. Charging handle, feed tray, bolt. Everything looked ready. The steel ramp in front of them remained closed. For now. Behind it waited hell. The coxswain shouted over the engine noise. 30 seconds. Nobody spoke. Some soldiers lowered their heads. Others fixed their eyes on the ramp. Every second seemed slower than the last. The machine gunner adjusted his grip. His gloves already felt damp from seawater. His breathing became heavier. Not from exhaustion. From anticipation. The craft struck a sandbar. Metal scraped against the bottom. The engine roared harder. Another explosion rocked the boat. Fragments rattled across the roof. The coxswain yelled again. Stand by. The soldiers rose to their feet. Equipment clattered together. The machine gun crew lifted their weapon. Heavy. Awkward. Essential. Then, the front ramp dropped. Instantly, daylight flooded inside. So did gunfire. German machine guns opened fire before many soldiers could even step forward. The first men in line collapsed immediately. Others jumped into water deeper than expected. Loaded down with equipment, some disappeared beneath the surface before reaching the beach. Chaos erupted. The machine gunner splashed into freezing water. Every step became a struggle. The Browning machine gun felt twice as heavy underwater. Bullets struck around him, throwing fountains of seawater into the air. Engineers tried clearing obstacles. Medics searched desperately for the wounded. Officers shouted commands that vanished beneath explosions. Nobody could hear clearly anymore. The battlefield had become one endless roar. Some landing craft burned. Others drifted without crews. The beach itself seemed impossible to cross. German defenders occupied elevated positions overlooking nearly every yard of open sand. Advancing meant exposing yourself. Stopping meant becoming an easy target. Every decision carried deadly consequences. The machine gun crew finally reached partial cover behind a steel beach obstacle. It wasn't much, but it interrupted the direct line of fire. For a few precious seconds, they could breathe. The assistant gunner immediately opened ammunition boxes. The gunner assembled the weapon on its tripod. Hands moved automatically. Training replaced panic. Feed the belt. Lock the cover. Charge the weapon. Fire. The Browning erupted. Its distinctive rhythm echoed across the beach. Unlike the rapid chatter of lighter weapons, the Browning delivered powerful, deliberate bursts capable of suppressing enemy positions hundreds of yards away. Each burst forced German defenders to duck. Each burst gave American riflemen another opportunity to move. Machine guns rarely won battles alone, but they created opportunities. Every second the enemy kept their heads down, someone else could advance. The assistant gunner fed belt after belt into the receiver. Empty brass piled around them. Smoke drifted from the barrel. Nearby riflemen quickly noticed where the covering fire originated. They began moving in short rushes. 5 yards. Drop. Fire. Another 5 yards. Little by little, the impossible became possible. German return fire intensified. Bullets slammed into the obstacle protecting the crew. Metal sparked. Sand exploded around them. Shrapnel filled the air. Still, the machine gun kept firing. The crew ignored everything except the next ammunition belt. Another burst. Another correction. Another burst. German soldiers attempted to shift positions. The gunner tracked their movement. His fire followed them relentlessly. Some enemy machine guns briefly stopped shooting. Others continued without pause. This wasn't a duel between two men. It was a battle between discipline and determination. Minutes stretched into hours. The invasion hung in the balance. All across Omaha Beach, small groups of Americans fought isolated battles. Officers fell. Sergeants assumed command. Corpsmen treated wounded under fire. Engineers blasted gaps through obstacles. Destroyers risked running dangerously close to shore to bombard German bunkers directly. Every action mattered. Every survivor mattered. The machine gun crew had already fired thousands of rounds. Their shoulders ached. Their ears rang constantly. The barrel glowed with heat. Yet they refused to stop. Because somewhere behind them, more landing craft were arriving. More Americans were coming ashore. And every man crossing that beach depended on someone else keeping the Germans pinned down. The gunner understood one simple truth. If his weapon fell silent, the enemy would raise their heads. And when they did, the killing would begin all over again. So he reached for another ammunition belt, locked it into place, pressed the trigger once more. This was only the beginning. Before the battle ended, his Browning machine gun would fire so many rounds that even veteran soldiers would struggle to believe the number. Nearly 12,000 rounds. And the hardest fighting was still ahead. Chapter 3, 12,000 rounds. By mid-morning, Omaha Beach had become one of the deadliest places on Earth. The carefully planned invasion had dissolved into hundreds of small, desperate battles. Radio communications were failing. Officers had been killed or separated from their units. Landing craft continued to arrive under relentless fire, unloading wave after wave of American soldiers into a storm of bullets and exploding artillery. For many men on the beach, survival depended on one simple question. Could someone keep the Germans' heads down long enough for them to move? That was the job of the machine gunner. And he never stopped. Each time he squeezed the trigger, the Browning M1919 roared to life with its deep, unmistakable rhythm. Unlike a rifle, a machine gun wasn't meant to eliminate one target at a time. Its true purpose was suppression. It forced enemy soldiers to stay behind cover. It disrupted their aim. It bought precious seconds. Those seconds could mean the difference between life and death. As the battle intensified, the gunner swept his fire across German trenches, bunker openings, and machine gun positions hidden among the cliffs. He wasn't firing blindly. Months of training had taught him how to read the battlefield. A flash inside a bunker. A shadow moving behind sandbags. A helmet appearing for just a split second. Every movement became a target. Every burst was deliberate. The assistant gunner fed another ammunition belt into the receiver. Metal links disappeared into the weapon as empty brass poured onto the sand. The pile of spent cartridge cases grew larger with every passing minute. The gun barrel radiated intense heat. Continuous firing generated temperatures capable of damaging the weapon if ignored. The crew had practiced barrel changes countless times during training. Now they performed them under enemy fire. One man removed the scorching barrel using protective gloves. Another immediately locked a cool replacement into place. Within seconds, the Browning was firing again. No hesitation. No wasted movement. Every second mattered. Nearby American riflemen noticed something remarkable. Whenever the machine gun opened fire, German defenders became less aggressive. Enemy machine gunners ducked lower inside their bunkers. Rifle fire slowed. Mortar crews hesitated before exposing themselves. Those brief moments allowed American soldiers to crawl forward, dragging wounded comrades behind seawalls, beach obstacles, and shell craters. Some engineers reached obstacles they had been unable to approach earlier. Explosives were placed. Paths were cleared. Small victories began adding together. Still, the Germans refused to surrender the high ground. Their defensive positions dominated the beach from elevated bluffs overlooking the landing zones. From above, they could observe nearly every movement below. American troops remained dangerously exposed. Destroyers offshore recognized the desperate situation. Ignoring the risk of mines and shallow water, several U.S. Navy ships steamed closer to shore than anyone thought possible. From just a few thousand yards away, their massive naval guns fired directly into German strongpoints. Entire sections of cliff erupted beneath high-explosive shells. Concrete cracked. Dust clouds filled the sky. Some bunkers fell silent forever. Others somehow continued firing. The machine gun crew used every naval explosion as an opportunity. Whenever smoke covered the cliffs, they shifted positions. Not by much. Just enough to improve their angle of fire. Remaining in one place too long invited disaster. German snipers searched constantly for machine gun teams. Heavy weapons attracted attention. The enemy understood exactly how dangerous they were. Soon bullets began striking closer than ever. One round punched through the ammunition box. Another ricocheted off the tripod. Fragments sprayed across the sand. The assistant gunner glanced at the damage. Then calmly reached for another ammunition belt. The firing never stopped. Around them, medics crawled from casualty to casualty. They carried no rifles, only medical bags. Despite being protected under the Geneva Convention, they were far from safe. Many treated wounded soldiers while bullets struck the ground only feet away. Some paid with their own lives. Others refused to leave until every wounded man within reach had received help. The beach became a scene of extraordinary courage. Engineers cleared mines under direct fire. Signalmen repaired broken communications. Tank crews struggled to maneuver vehicles trapped in soft sand. Small groups of infantry attacked bunker after bunker using grenades, flamethrowers, and sheer determination. Nobody knew exactly how the battle would end. Even senior commanders offshore feared the invasion might fail. Reports arriving from Omaha Beach painted a grim picture. Heavy casualties, scattered units, limited progress. For a brief period that morning, the outcome of the entire invasion remained uncertain. Had the Germans managed to push the Americans back into the sea, history might have unfolded very differently. But something was changing. Slowly, almost invisibly, the defenders were beginning to lose momentum. American soldiers started reaching the base of the bluffs. Others discovered narrow draws and hidden paths leading upward. Small assault teams climbed through brush, craters, and rocky terrain, attacking German positions from directions they hadn't expected. Those attacks succeeded only because someone below continued providing covering fire. The machine gunner remained exactly where he was needed. His shoulder throbbed from hours behind the weapon. His ears had long since gone numb from the constant roar of gunfire. His uniform was soaked with seawater, sweat, and sand. Smoke coated everything. His hands were blackened with grease and carbon residue. Still, he kept firing. Another belt disappeared into the Browning. 250 rounds. Then another. Then another. Ammunition runners worked tirelessly, carrying heavy boxes across open sand despite enemy fire. Every successful delivery meant the machine gun could continue protecting advancing troops. Without ammunition, courage alone would accomplish nothing. The crew understood this better than anyone. At one point, the assistant gunner counted the remaining belts. The supply was shrinking. Far too quickly, requests were sent backward. More ammunition arrived. The firing resumed almost immediately. Hours passed. The number became astonishing. 1,000 rounds, 3,000, 5,000, 7,000. Veteran soldiers nearby later recalled that the Browning seemed almost alive, its steady rhythm becoming part of the battlefield itself. Whenever its fire paused for a barrel change, everyone noticed. Whenever it resumed, men found the confidence to move again. Then came the final ammunition deliveries. The machine gunner loaded another belt. He no longer thought about the total. He focused only on the next burst, the next bunker, the next movement, the next opportunity. Late in the battle, American forces finally began breaking through the German defenses overlooking the beach. Bunkers that had dominated the shoreline for hours fell one after another. Machine gun nests were silenced. Artillery crews abandoned damaged positions. The Atlantic Wall, once believed nearly impossible to penetrate, had begun to crack. As American flags advanced farther inland, the roar of the Browning gradually slowed. Not because the gunner had grown tired, but because there were finally fewer targets left to suppress. When the firing ended, someone estimated the incredible total. Nearly 12,000 rounds fired in a single day. 12,000 rounds. Enough ammunition to fill multiple heavy crates. Enough sustained fire to wear out barrels, strain mechanisms, and exhaust even the most experienced crew. Yet through discipline, teamwork, and determination, the weapon had never fallen silent when it mattered most. The beach behind them was now crowded with fresh troops, vehicles, engineers, and medical teams. The impossible landing had become a foothold. The invasion had survived. But for the men who had fought since dawn, there was little time to celebrate. Because D-Day wasn't over. Not even close. Beyond the beaches lay miles of hedgerows, villages, forests, and determined German defenders. The Battle of Normandy had only just begun. And the gunner who had fired nearly 12,000 rounds would soon discover that surviving the beach was only the first chapter of a much longer war. Chapter 4. Holding the line. By late afternoon on June 6, 1944, the sound of battle had begun to change. The relentless machine gun fire that had swept the beaches for hours was slowly being replaced by scattered rifle shots, exploding grenades, and the rumble of tanks pushing inland. Smoke still drifted across Omaha Beach, but the shoreline no longer belonged solely to the defenders. For the first time that day, the Allies had a foothold. It had come at an unimaginable cost. Thousands of American soldiers were dead, wounded, or missing. Landing craft lay destroyed in the surf. Vehicles burned where they had stalled on the sand. Medical stations overflowed with casualties, and exhausted corpsmen worked without pause, treating the wounded with whatever supplies they had left. The victory was fragile. One determined German counterattack could still throw the invasion back into the sea. That reality was understood by every soldier who had survived the landing, including the machine gunner whose Browning had fired nearly 12,000 rounds. His weapon had finally fallen silent, not because the danger had passed, but because the battle had moved beyond the beach. The machine gun crew gathered what ammunition remained and prepared to advance. The same weapon that had protected hundreds of men on the shoreline would now help defend the growing beachhead. Every step inland revealed the true cost of the invasion. Destroyed equipment littered the ground. Abandoned helmets rested beside shattered rifles. Crater after crater scarred the landscape. The air carried the smell of gunpowder, burning fuel, and churned earth. Many soldiers later admitted they barely remembered parts of the day. The stress had been overwhelming. Time seemed distorted. Minutes felt like hours. Hours disappeared in moments. For the machine gunner, exhaustion finally began catching up. His shoulders ached from carrying the heavy Browning across wet sand and rocky ground. His hands were blistered from handling hot barrels and ammunition belts. His uniform was stiff with salt water, sweat, and dirt. His ears still rang from the endless roar of combat. Yet there was no opportunity to rest. The mission had changed. Instead of taking the beach, they now had to hold it. Throughout the afternoon, more Allied troops poured into Normandy. Fresh infantry units arrived. Artillery batteries rolled ashore. Engineers cleared roads and removed obstacles. Supply trucks delivered ammunition, fuel, food, and medical equipment. The beach transformed from a battlefield into a massive military staging area. It was organized chaos. Every minute counted. Commanders knew the Germans would not remain passive for long. Somewhere beyond the hills, enemy units were regrouping. Reserve formations were already moving toward Normandy. Panzer divisions, the armored spearhead of Hitler's army, posed the greatest threat. If they reached the beaches before the Allies strengthened their defenses, the consequences could be catastrophic. The machine gun crew received orders to establish a defensive position overlooking one of the roads leading inland. It was classic machine gun terrain. Open fields, narrow approaches, limited cover. Exactly the type of landscape where a well-positioned Browning could dominate the battlefield. Working quickly, the crew dug shallow fighting positions. Sandbags were scarce. Shovels became as important as rifles. Every inch of cover increased their chances of survival. The machine gun was mounted once again. Ammunition belts were arranged within easy reach. Fields of fire were carefully measured. Unlike the frantic chaos of the beach, this required patience. Every angle mattered. Every possible avenue of approach had to be covered. Hours earlier they had been reacting. Now, they were preparing. As darkness approached, uncertainty spread through the Allied lines. Nobody knew exactly where the Germans were. Reports conflicted. Some claimed enemy tanks were only miles away. Others insisted the defenses had collapsed. Rumors traveled faster than facts. Every distant engine sounded like approaching armor. Every movement in the hedgerows attracted attention. Machine gunners remained alert. Their role was no longer simply supporting attacks. Now they formed the backbone of the defense. If German infantry launched a counterattack, the machine guns would be the first weapons to open fire. History had repeatedly proven that properly positioned machine guns could stop forces many times larger than themselves. The men knew it. The enemy knew it too. Night fell over Normandy. The battlefield grew strangely quiet. Not silent. Never silent. Artillery continued firing in the distance. Occasional bursts of gunfire echoed across the countryside. Vehicles rumbled along newly captured roads. Aircraft passed overhead. But compared to the chaos of the morning, the darkness felt almost unreal. For the first time all day, many soldiers had a chance to think. Some quietly remembered friends who hadn't survived the landing. Others cleaned their weapons by flashlight. Letters were written whenever paper could be found. Simple notes. I'm alive. 3 words that meant everything. The machine gunner carefully inspected his Browning. Hours of continuous fire had pushed the weapon to its limits. Despite firing nearly 12,000 rounds, it had remained operational. That reliability wasn't an accident. The Browning M1919 had earned its reputation through rugged engineering and disciplined crews. A poorly maintained machine gun would have failed long before reaching such extraordinary numbers. But this crew had followed their training perfectly. Barrels changed. Mechanisms cleaned. Feed systems checked. Every detail mattered. Their discipline had allowed the weapon to perform when lives depended on it. Across Normandy, similar stories unfolded. Small groups of soldiers accomplished extraordinary feats. Combat engineers blew open fortified positions. Navy destroyers sailed dangerously close to shore to support trapped infantry. Medics treated hundreds of wounded under direct fire. Paratroopers fought isolated battles behind enemy lines, holding bridges and crossroads until reinforcements arrived. No single individual had won D-Day. Victory belonged to thousands of ordinary people performing extraordinary acts under impossible conditions. Still, certain stories stood apart. The machine gunner's relentless fire became one of them, not because he sought recognition, but because his determination represented something larger, the willingness to continue, when every instinct told you to stop. Military historians later estimated that suppressive fire from machine gun teams played a crucial role in allowing infantry to climb the bluffs above Omaha Beach. Without that covering fire, casualties would almost certainly have been even higher. Every burst created opportunity. Every opportunity saved lives. By midnight, Allied commanders finally received encouraging reports. Despite fierce resistance, all 5 invasion beaches remained connected. Thousands of vehicles had landed safely. More than 150,000 Allied troops were now on French soil. The invasion had succeeded. Barely. But success came with an enormous price. More than 4,000 Allied soldiers had been killed on D-Day. Thousands more were wounded. German losses were also severe, though exact numbers remain debated by historians. The beaches had become one of the bloodiest battlefields of World War II. Yet everyone understood something important. This was not the end. It was the beginning. Ahead lay nearly 11 months of brutal combat across France, Belgium, the Netherlands, and finally Germany itself. Many of the men who survived D-Day would not survive the battles that followed. The machine gunner looked across the dark Norman countryside. Somewhere beyond the horizon, the war continued. And although history would eventually remember June 6, 1944, as the turning point in the liberation of Western Europe, the men who fought there knew a simple truth. Winning one day did not mean winning the war. The greatest test was still ahead. Chapter 5. The Legacy of an Unsung Hero. When the sun rose over Normandy on June 7, 1944, the beaches looked nothing like they had 24 hours earlier. The chaos of the invasion had given way to an astonishing transformation. Bulldozers pushed wreckage aside. Engineers repaired roads and cleared minefields. Medical teams evacuated the wounded to waiting hospital ships. Supply trucks rolled inland carrying fuel, ammunition, food, and reinforcements. The beach that had been a killing ground was rapidly becoming the gateway to the liberation of Europe. Yet beneath the movement and organization, reminders of the previous day were everywhere. Abandoned helmets, damaged landing craft, spent shell casings scattered across the sand, freshly dug graves marked with simple wooden crosses. For the soldiers who had survived D-Day, there was little time to reflect. The war continued. Every mile inland brought new dangers. The dense hedgerows of Normandy created a battlefield unlike anything the Americans had experienced before. Thick earthen banks covered with centuries-old vegetation divided fields into natural fortresses. German defenders used them brilliantly, forcing the Allies into slow, brutal fighting where every field had to be won one at a time. Among the men moving inland was the machine gunner who had fired nearly 12,000 rounds on D-Day. His extraordinary effort on the beach had never been about setting a record. He wasn't counting rounds. He wasn't thinking about recognition. He was simply doing his job, keeping the enemy pinned down, protecting the men advancing beside him, giving others a chance to survive. That was enough. As the campaign in Normandy continued, stories like his often disappeared into the larger history of the war. The headlines focused on generals, on famous speeches, on major offensives, on strategic victories. But wars are rarely decided by famous names alone. They are won by ordinary people making extraordinary decisions in impossible moments. The gunner's story reminds us of a simple military truth. Firepower alone doesn't win battles. Discipline does. Training does. Teamwork does. Courage does. A machine gun is only as effective as the crew behind it. Every ammunition belt had to be carried across the beach. Every barrel had to be changed at exactly the right time. Every malfunction had to be cleared within seconds. Every burst had to be controlled. The assistant gunner, the ammunition carriers, the riflemen protecting their position. Each member of that small team contributed to the success that day. Together, they became far more powerful than any one individual could have been. Military historians have often described Omaha Beach as the most difficult of the 5 D-Day landing zones. The high bluffs, reinforced bunkers, overlapping fields of fire, and determined German resistance created conditions unlike those on the other beaches. For several terrifying hours, the invasion seemed dangerously close to failure. Some commanders even considered the possibility that American forces might have to withdraw. But that withdrawal never came. Instead, small groups of soldiers took initiative. Junior officers assumed command after senior leaders fell. Engineers blasted paths through obstacles. Destroyers moved closer to shore, risking enemy fire to destroy German strongpoints. Machine gunners laid down relentless suppressive fire. One small success led to another. One bunker fell. Then another. Eventually, the impossible became reality. The beachhead held. That success changed the course of World War II. Within weeks, more than 1 million Allied soldiers and enormous quantities of equipment had crossed the English Channel. France was gradually liberated. Paris was freed in August 1944. The Allies continued advancing across Western Europe, pushing Nazi Germany back toward its own borders. Less than a year after D-Day, the war in Europe came to an end. It is impossible to say exactly how many lives were saved by the gunners' nearly 12,000 rounds. History doesn't measure courage that way. No document records every soldier who reached cover because enemy defenders were forced to keep their heads down. No report identifies every life preserved by a few extra seconds of suppressive fire. But veterans understood its value. Again and again, survivors described how machine gun teams allowed them to move when moving seemed impossible. Those bursts of fire created opportunities. Those opportunities became victories. And those victories changed history. The Browning M1919 itself became one of the iconic weapons of the Second World War. Reliable, accurate, remarkably durable. It served American forces across Europe, North Africa, and the Pacific. Many veterans trusted it with their lives. Its steady rhythm became one of the defining sounds of Allied infantry combat. But even the finest weapon is only a tool. Its true strength comes from the people willing to carry it into danger. The young gunner who fired nearly 12,000 rounds represented thousands of Americans who answered their country's call during World War II. Most never considered themselves heroes. After the war, many returned home. They became teachers, mechanics, farmers, factory workers, police officers, business owners, fathers, grandfathers. They rarely spoke about what they had seen. For decades, countless veterans carried their memories in silence. Some believed they had simply done what anyone else would have done. Others found the memories too painful to revisit. As time passed, the generation that fought on D-Day grew smaller. Today, only a handful of those brave men remain. With every passing year, their first-hand memories become even more precious. That is why stories like this matter. Not because they glorify war. War is never glorious. The beaches of Normandy proved that with heartbreaking clarity. Instead, these stories honor the people who faced unimaginable circumstances with extraordinary determination. They remind us that history is not only shaped by presidents, prime ministers, and generals. Sometimes, history changes because one soldier refuses to stop firing. Because one medic refuses to leave the wounded behind. Because one engineer clears a path through a minefield. Because one destroyer captain steers closer to shore than anyone believes possible. History is built from thousands of individual acts of courage. On June 6, 1944, the world witnessed one of the greatest military operations ever attempted. More than 156,000 Allied troops crossed the English Channel. Nearly 7,000 ships supported the invasion. Thousands of aircraft filled the skies. It was an achievement of planning, logistics, and cooperation unlike anything seen before. But at its heart, D-Day remained deeply human. It was fought one beach, one bunker, one squad, one decision at a time. Somewhere amid the smoke, the crashing waves, and the roar of battle, one American machine gunner kept pressing the trigger. Again, and again, and again. By the time the fighting slowed, nearly 12,000 rounds had left the barrel of his Browning. Each round represented determination. Each burst represented hope. Each second of suppressive fire helped another soldier move closer to victory. His name may not appear in every history book. His story may never become a Hollywood blockbuster. But his actions remain part of one of the most important days in modern history. Because freedom is rarely secured by a single dramatic moment. More often, it is earned through thousands of small acts of courage performed by ordinary people who refuse to give up. The beaches of Normandy are quiet now. The bunkers still stand. The cliffs still overlook the sea. Visitors walk across the same sand where history changed forever. The waves continue to roll onto the shore, just as they did on that cold June morning in 1944. But if you stand there long enough, and let the silence settle, it isn't difficult to imagine the echoes. The engines of the landing craft, the thunder of naval guns, the voices of young soldiers, and somewhere in the distance, the steady, relentless rhythm of a Browning machine gun firing into history. As we close this chapter of history, remember that the freedoms we enjoy today were built on the courage of ordinary people who faced extraordinary circumstances. The gunner who fired nearly 12,000 rounds on D-Day wasn't fighting for fame or recognition. He was fighting for the man beside him, and for a future he might never live to see. If you enjoyed this documentary and want more cinematic stories from World War II, forgotten heroes, legendary battles, and the untold moments that shaped history, make sure to subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our next documentary. If this story moved you, leave a comment below answering one question. What part of D-Day do you think required the greatest courage? If you found this documentary valuable, please give it a thumbs up and share it with someone who loves military history. Thank you for watching, and until next time, remember the heroes, honor the sacrifice, never forget history.